Senator Sherrod Brown, you've been in the forefront of the fight in the Senate to expand Social Security rather than cut it, as was the popular proposal at least a year or two ago. Why, in your opinion, is this such a critical issue?
Well, it's a critical issue if you get out and talk to people. Pope Francis recently said to exhort his parish priests to go out and smell like the flock. And if members of the Senate, members of the House would go out and talk to real people about real needs, they'd see how important Social Security is. That it's for half of people in my state, more than half, and for half of the people in most states in this country, Social Security is the great part of their retirement income. And to think of adjusting the cost of living downward, it makes absolutely no sense. We need to think in Social Security not in terms of balancing the budget, but think of it in terms of pension reform and, most importantly, retirement security, because it really is all about retirement security for tens of millions of Americans.
And we've seen that retirement security dissipated by the erosion of corporate pension funds, the loss of wealth, and the housing crisis, and so on. Now, I like the Pope Francis quote, and one of the other advantages of smelling like the flock is that you become invisible to predators, which leads me to my next topic, which is the election. The upcoming election. The Washington Post reported on this issue, Social Security, and you and the burgeoning group of Democrats who are pushing to expand Social Security. And the sense is that this is, I guess the point of my question is, isn't this good politics as well as good policy? Wouldn't it be smart for other Democrats to join you, the ones that haven't, and push this effort with a 2014 election coming up and an off-season, an off-year vote that is predominantly older and so on?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Populism is always, to me, it's the right policy. Minimum wage, extending unemployment, fairer tax system, working on a trade policy that works for workers, enhancing, strengthening Social Security. All those play very well with the public. They also happen to be the right policy. And I urge my colleagues every day to speak out on things like minimum wage and to speak out on making Social Security stronger and a bit more generous to seniors in this country. I mean, with what you said, corporate pensions have declined, people's savings have declined. When wages are stagnant for 60, 70, 80% of the public, that savings is so very, very difficult. Even if you have a 401k, the chances are your employer, even if your employer matches it, and that's not nearly always the case, you're not making enough money in so many cases to put aside the amount of money you need to a week or a month or a pay period in order to build any kind of a nest egg that can withstand the inflation and all the other things that can happen to older people after they retire. And that's why I want to make sure that Social Security is much closer to the replacement value of where you were working, and more giving seniors a bit more of a fighting chance if they don't have the kind of savings that pensions used to give people.
Well, and what can we do to, we're obviously allies on this issue. I'm a senior fellow at Campaign for America's Future, which had the new populism conference last week. This show is sponsored by Social Security Works, which is working to expand Social Security. Your proposals, I would say, given the scope of the problem, are modest and moderate. How do we get more people on board? How do we get millennials to turn out to vote, given that there's this prevalence of belief among some millennials anyway, Social Security won't be there for me. That's been the propaganda line. How do we cut through the static and get a message out on this between now and November?
Well, it's the kind of work that you personally are doing, RJ. It's the kind of work that the Populist Conference did. It really is talking to people and organizing and getting seniors out, showing to tell their stories. It really is about telling their stories, because I hear some members of the Senate that are wealthier certainly than the average person in this country, that they're not cruel. They're not. I mean, some Democrats even that just say, well, to fix these entitlements, we need to do this. When they use the word entitlement, if they're using the word entitlement, you've got to be specific. Say, when Republicans say we've got to fix entitlements, what do you mean by that? Because it sounds good to fix entitlements; they're not sustainable, all that. But what do you mean? And what they mean is they want to cut Social Security, and the only way to beat this back is to to be on the offense. It explained that social insurance in this country is social insurance. You pay into it as you pay into Social Security, and you should get a decent benefit back in order to live a decent standard of living. And I think the more outspoken any of us can be, the stories we tell about how seniors trying to live on $1,100 or $1,200 or sometimes less per month in Social Security, how they struggled in 2 or 3 low-income jobs and haven't been able to put savings aside, didn't even have the chance for a 401k. Their pension was taken away a decade ago. That Social Security is really it, and the focus needs to be Social Security is not. You don't cut Social Security, balance the budget. You increase Social Security for people to have a decent standard of living in the retirement security they work towards for 40 years of their work lives.
Now you've been also in the forefront of the fight to restrain runaway growth and recklessness on Wall Street. And the reason why I bring that up, you've done great work in that area. We have discussions about raising the cap, as your bill would do, the payroll tax cap to get more revenue for Social Security. But there are a number of other proposals out there also for revenue for Social Security to expand the benefits. Estate tax or a financial transactions tax. What do you think about some of these longer-term ideas for expanding Social Security even more?
Yeah, I think we look to, again, the debate has to be not about entitlements, not about balancing the budget, not about the, quote, unsustainability of Social Security, because that's not the issue. The issue is retirement security and how do we help seniors. And whether it's lifting the cap, whether it's another kind of a tax that the affluent can pay a little more easily, just asking them to pay their fair share when we've seen what hedge fund managers and so many have done. We've seen these inversions now, these corporations that sort of move overseas for tax purposes and basically to avoid taxes, and it's tens of billions of dollars. All those kinds of things we need in this public debate to show that, you know, what do we do to help people with retirement security? What do we do to give people that have struggled their whole lives some kind of decent standard of living in the last 20 or 30 years of their lives?
Now, you've worked across the aisle on Wall Street reform. There's the Brown-Vitter bill on too big to fail banks. Any chance you can bring along any of your Republican colleagues in the fight to expand Social Security, or you think they'll be hopelessly troglodytes about this?
Well,
what do you think?
I think that the Republican way of thinking, in Washington, Republican way of thinking is they don't like social insurance. They've tried to privatize Medicare over the last 20 years. The Bush administration, less than a decade ago, tried to privatize Social Security. They don't much like the role of government there, but that's where the public comes in. That's where, you know, they still act like they like at election time Social Security and Medicare. They run, you know, the congressman, some congressman's mother comes on, my son would never cut Medicare and Social Security. Well, actually, they did or tried. So but it's a question of organizing and getting people to speak out about this, that these two programs, Social Security and Medicare, have lifted a number of generations out of poverty, but still far too many people are right on the edge, and strengthening these programs means everything. But it really, you know, the philosophy of the Republican Party of 2014 is they don't like any of these government programs, but they're going to listen to the public when elections happen and they realize that senior voters, frankly, didn't really buy their lines.
Now, last question, because I know you've got to go and vote in a minute. So my last question for you, you've also spoken up on Republican, what I would characterize as a Republican demonization of disabled Americans who are receiving SSDI or disability insurance under Social Security. Anything we can do to keep that on the screen between now and November, and for that matter, now and ongoing?
Yeah, they've tried to separate in the public's mind good social insurance, the retirement program, when they're not trying to dismantle it, but the good social insurance from bad social insurance, disability insurance, so they can win support for what they call structural reform. They claim it's going bankrupt. They claim it's rife with fraud. There is no real evidence of that. There are some fiscal financial problems, but we've done something a dozen times in the last 50 years in Congress. That's called a reallocation, where we don't increase taxes. We simply move money from other parts into the disability fund. So we can fix any of these issues, but Republicans are going to demagogue that issue. Coming up, you can always come up with a story of somebody that's abused something in a country of 320 million people, but we've got to fight back on that because that program really matters to people. It hasn't been updated in a good while. People don't get enough assistance from it. People use it more in bad economic times because they're looking for any kind of help they can get, but we got to fight back.
Well, no more government by anecdote, I guess is the way to put it. Well, Senator
no more
Sherrod
government
Brown.
by anecdote, although we should be telling anecdotes on our side because people listen to anecdotes. People just understand they aren't necessarily factual when you add them up. And when I see some, when they use some poor soul that may have of some way abused the system and use them as an example for everybody, clearly you got to push back.
Well, I appreciate that correction. And if we had more time, I would ask you how you keep your spirits up going in there each and every day fighting the good fight.
Because it matters and because so many people like you have our backs. That's how.
Well, thanks so much for doing that. And thanks so much for coming on the show. I hope we get to speak to you again sometime.
All right, we'll do it. Thanks, RJ.
Thanks so much, Senator Sherrod Brown.